Hey, what is up, everyone? Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the Life Runners podcast. I recently, as maybe some of you do, sort of revisit some YouTube videos that you may have watched in the past related to watches. I think there's always some gems that sort of come out of a lot of them, and sometimes you're consuming so much information in these videos that you miss pieces of it. One of the videos that I watched recently was a Hodinkee video. It was the H10 live stream called The Italian Influence, where Ben Clymer sat down with two huge icons in the watch world, John Goldberger and Davide Parmegiani, and spoke to them about the vintage watch world and everything related, everything from how they met, interesting watches that they had purchased. A really great sort of interview with both of them, and it's just such a great video. One of the things that they spoke about here was tips on how to get into, or what sort of rules of collecting watches. And John Goldberg gave a list of 5 rules, and I thought I would go over those 5 rules to discuss them today, because I genuinely think that these are some of the best rules that you're probably going to get, and you might have missed when you were watching the live stream or at the H10 event. For those of you who don't know, John Goldberger, or Auro Montanari, he is a very famous Italian collector and icon on a Hodinkee, but also just a phenomenal collector on Instagram. He's so knowledgeable. He's written books about the watches that we all love, and just a really incredible figure that's sort of added to the watch world, for sure. Davide Parmegiani is a very great dealer and has a very close relationship with John Goldberger, or Auro, and has supplied him with many of the watches that he has in his collection, but has dealt with many other customers throughout that time. So John Goldberger was asked, what are the collecting tips for someone who's just getting into the hobby? And so he gave 5 tips, and I'll go over them right now. The first one was buy what you like and don't follow. And what he meant here was don't follow the trends with watch collecting. I think there is a tendency for us to buy things that we see on people's wrists and what we see people respect. Or I think respect might be the wrong word, but what people are attracted to. You probably have an Instagram account where you follow some watch Instagram pages, and I'm sure there is a common thread with a lot of the watches that they post. I probably would bet some money on the fact that they've probably posted a Rolex sports watch in the last 2 weeks. They've probably posted a Royal Oak or a Nautilus or a Daytona somewhere in there over the last 2 weeks, and we're influenced heavily by what we see. And I think, to John's point, he's saying, sure, those are great watches, but buy it if you truly like it, and not because other people are influencing you to buy it because you think it's the mainstream thing to do. I think you probably have heard of the don't follow the trend sort of thing, but I think that's what he was really getting at. I get just as much enjoyment out of, I'll take my Mademoiselle Yacht Timer, which was my first vintage watch purchase ever, which is not a very expensive watch, not followed by many collectors, but I get so much enjoyment out of that because I truly love the dial and the story and the construction of that watch. So I think it's a really great first rule. The second rule is that John Goldberger mentioned was have discipline, look for quality, and the best examples. So this is a pretty interesting point. I think there's a couple ways you can look at it. One, I think to John's point, you want to buy, if you're going to be buying a watch and you truly love it and you're not just following the crowds of what you're purchasing, you want to get the best example that you possibly can. And that means having one that is of the highest quality. Now, how you define quality, I think, is where there's maybe a split in the tree here. If you're looking for something that's just like new, basically unpolished, unworn, dial is not doesn't show a lot of age, like that's one way you could go about it. But if you are a collector who thinks looking for quality means finding those watches that have patina and there are scratches on it because it shows a story, like I think that's another way you can go. But for the general population, I'd say look for ones that are of high quality, that look the part and look everything that you have been lusting after when you're looking for that specific piece. The third rule is sort of in tandem with finding the best quality and finding the best examples, and that's buy the seller. When you're dealing with vintage watches, there's well, let me step back. So I think when John Goldberger got into the collecting watches, and Davide was someone who he had met and started buying watches from, the amount of sellers out there was a lot smaller. There were not gobs and gobs of watch dealers with all kinds of watches. The range of sellers is very wide, both in location, in the types of watches that they source, but also the quality of watches that they source, the time that they put into doing the research, into finding information about that watch. And because there's such a big range, the quality of your watches can vary. And so finding a seller that you trust the information that they're telling you about a watch, you trust that they could find something that you're looking to purchase. That is the link that I think is so important when collecting vintage watches, because you don't want to buy something and then go back to your seller and basically the relationship is over. You want that lasting relationship. I think the other piece to this is buying a seller means you have to obviously start a relationship with a seller, and dealers can often be so influential in your life. They could be a friend. They could be they could turn into a real advisor in your life, but they can also look for things that might interest you. And so if I told a seller that I really love 1950s chronographs, they're going to probably look out for those. And so the opportunities and sort of the network effect from that dealer can be extremely important. So I think there's a network effect, a friendship that you can probably have. John Goldberger and Davide Parmegiani. Davide is a great example of that relationship. But then there's also quality, history, provenance, and quality of the seller is super important. His fourth rule is to study. Now, I think I have said this multiple times on my channel, but watch collecting is more than just having a bunch of objects. It goes beyond that. And I think a lot of the times people rush into the fact that they have, let's say, $10,000 and they say, okay, I'm just going to buy a bunch of watches and that's going to be my collection. And then once they have their watches, they're like, okay, now I'm a watch collector. I think that one of the most important and interesting parts of being a watch collector is identifying what you like, researching its history. I'll talk vintage watches, researching the history of those pieces, finding the watches that could be the high quality examples that you're looking to purchase, and studying the pictures and all the information that you can find about that watch. I think that is what makes vintage watch collecting so much fun. And so if you miss that, you're not going to experience vintage watches maybe as much as you possibly could, or at the highest level that you could, because you missed out on the, finding out about the history about a specific reference, and then researching all the different variations of that reference, and comparing watches that are for sale to the images that you have of each reference to see, okay, are there things that are lining up here between these? That is of utmost importance when it comes to, one, I think your watch collecting journey, and two, being able to buy high quality, best examples that you possibly can. I think one of the things that I've found is owning watches, and I think John Goldberger mentioned this too in many of his interviews. I think the journey is what's the most exciting piece. It's like approaching the dealer, how you negotiated it, and that's the fun part. And it goes back to the idea that your network or the people around you that are interested in watches really makes it the most enjoyable. I think it also allows you to not make mistakes. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of making mistakes when buying watches because they didn't do enough research. And that could go for a quality side. Maybe they bought something that was with a redial because they didn't know that, that specific reference never was produced with a specific dial variation. Like, that's one way of looking at it. But it also allows you to buy the highest quality pieces that you can through studying. The last rule that John Goldberger mentions in this video, and I'll put a link in the description to this into the show notes of this podcast so that you can watch the full live stream if you haven't watched it in a while. The last rule is don't be in competition and be humble. I think there's a tendency, especially on social media, to engage with the watch community, and you post the watches that mean something to you or are important to you, but you're always looking at other people and seeing what they have in their collections. And I think that's the wrong mentality to have, because if you go back to the first rule, you buy what you like and you don't follow. You want to buy things that make you happy, not so that you can one up the Instagram page that you saw on, get a ton of likes or whatever. I think, so that's maybe the social media side of things, but then there's also just the community aspects of things. You don't have to have, you don't have to be the person with the most rare, the most expensive, the end of your group or the people around you. It's just not worth it. And I think he added sort of this be humble side of things to it, because when you're collecting watches, I think a lot of the times a watch can make you feel a certain way, and you don't want to put yourself above everyone else just because you have this one specific watch. You can get as much enjoyment out of a $50 watch as you can a $500,000 watch, and it doesn't put you in a different league at all. I think there's also, maybe to John Goldberger's expertise, I think there are people know a lot about watches, and I don't think anyone in in this community would say that they know everything about every single reference. I think there are people who know have a lot of deep knowledge about specific watches. I like to think that I know a lot about the Memo Sale because it is a watch that I hold pretty close to me. But I don't know everything about all the FP Journes that have been released. I don't know everything about Universal Genève chronographs. I know a little bit about them, but I'm certainly not the expert in them. And so being humble and not competing to know everything is important. And I also think it creates some sort of community, because it allows you to ask questions of those who might know more about it, and then you engage in conversations, and then maybe you go to a meetup, and it just allows you to be it allows you to integrate into the watch community a lot easier as a new vintage watch collector. So those are the 5 rules. Buy what you like and don't follow. Have discipline. Look for quality, the best examples. Buy the seller. Study. And don't be in competition. Be humble. I think these summarize a lot of the things that I've spoken about on Life on the Wrist. I've done a couple of videos talking about sort of my collecting philosophies, but I think these rules are phenomenal. And when you revisit these videos, you pick up these little gems that these absolute icons in vintage watches leave for you. I truly love this video, and just Auro Montanari is one of my absolute idols. So I'm very pleased to have gone over these rules. I hope they're helpful for you if you are getting into vintage watches, or just are interested in maybe revisiting how you collect watches. Let me know what you think about these rules. You can hit us up on our website or on our social media platforms. We're there if you want to check it out. If you are new to the podcast, be sure to follow us and share this with a friend who might be interested in a watch-related podcast. If you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, really does help me out. With that said, guys, thanks so much for listening to this podcast, and I'll catch you next week.